Welcome to the final Painday. A few days late, if not weeks at this point, bearing in mind for the first time in years we actually received a substantial April Fool's update, the prior absence of which being the entire reason this series came to be. And with that in mind, I'm going to call this year's the finale. There will be similarly unpleasant and nightmarish challenges on the horizon, don't worry about that, but Painday specifically is getting retired as this transition from March into April always seems to end up swamping me. With that in mind, let's go out with a bang with one of the simplest but also most sadistic rule sets I've ever faced down. I'm more nervous for this one than the bloody VR challenge, with both equally as likely to result in me throwing up at some point. That's enough preamble for this one. I have a feeling these rules are gonna speak for themselves. For Painday 2026, the core goal is extremely simple. We're not trying to string together heist victories, spinning a wheel to decide my fate, or switching weapons constantly. Instead, the primary objective is simply going to be to beat the hardest heist of each contractor within CrimeNet. I'm not counting events as a contractor because you've seen me suffer enough on lab rats over the years during the Halloween runs. I'm also not counting contractors who only have one viable heist, like Jimmy or the Continental, because that sort of defeats the point of picking the most difficult. With that in mind, I'll need 11 separate heist completions to escape this year's Painday prison. How have I decided which constitutes the most difficult? Well, in the most objective and unbiased way possible, I just consulted the person who has surely completed Payday 2's career mode more than anyone else on the planet, myself. Yeah, these are all my picks for hardest heist, and I will mention other possibilities I considered when I get to them, although I'll be genuinely amazed if anyone out there massively disagrees with these decisions. Strangely enough, it feels like most contractors have a notorious tough pick, so not too many judgment calls were required. Anyway, this is just the cherry on top as far as this run's core challenge is concerned, as the real main course is the fact that every cop on each heist will be transformed into bulldozers thanks to the Clone Army Mutator, probably Payday 2's most underrepresented mode, and for good reason. To make matters worse, whilst facing off against this horde, I'll be further neutered, as completing any heist on the list will lock off the set of weapons and perk deck I was using to do so, forcing me to adapt and create at least 11 viable setups to get this one done. The idea being I don't just rock out with the commando, or something similarly overpowered, every time to carry me to a repetitive victory. However, I do have a few things going in my favour relative to the usual career mode challenges. Firstly, Wonk is standing down for this one, as Kknowley steps up to bring 120 juicy skill points and a full suite of weapons and perks from the get-go. This arsenal will diminish over time, but at least for Heist 1, nothing's off the table. Additionally, I'll be enabling the always overpowered Crew AI, in addition to Joker Bulldozers, thanks to this mod. I still very much regret not pairing it up with the Jokermon run, so let's make up for lost time with this. Finally, I'll be sticking with Death Wish difficulty for this one. The Dozer health pools are already massive enough without needing to take that step onto death sentence. This series is called Painday, not CBT Day. I also tested out the possibility of using Creeps, another mutator, which makes cops explode upon death, the idea being this might help my obvious DPS problems, but after noting that nuclear dozers seem to hit you from halfway across the map, I decided against it. Stealth is obviously also not allowed, although I'll allow myself at least one objective at the start of potential stealth heists to speed things along. Anyway, that's it for what I have going for me. Let's dive into the build that's going to hopefully carry me through Bane's hardest contracted heist, Alesso. There's a good reason why I never pick the Alesso heist of counterfeit when running career mode, and it isn't just that the heist track gets me copyright claimed. This is a fiddly heist with a few really pivotal moments you can cock up, which will be much likelier to take place when surrounded by dozers. I might have gone a bit early with the build for this one though, running the most recently added perk deck Copycat, specifically the Prospect or Biker deck variant. Not only does this grant passive healing, the gimmick of ricochet damage, and a 2-second grace window like Anarchist or Armorer, it also gives you almost unrivaled armor-gating potential that even procs when my crew pick up the kill. When you know you're guaranteed to be getting slammed for huge damage, a mechanic that allows you to absorb and equalize that damage is obviously going to be top tier, which is why I say I might have used this one up too soon, as it could have been saved for the tougher heists to come. As for the rest of the build, we're running Joker skills, obviously to pair with the mod, as well as crit and ammo skills. With dozers being damage sponges, I obviously assumed ammo bags would be a virtual necessity for upkeep on my signature SMG and Clarion AR, equipped with the new burst fire mode added in the most recent sidetrack update. This turns it into a bit of a laser beam, ideal for shredding dozer faceplates. The crew AI, as they will be for much of this run, are wielding Akron LMGs. Even after the nerfs, I think this LMG remains top dog, although that's fairly anecdotal on my part. In addition to the trifecta of quick, inspiring, and sharp-eyed, there's not much reason to run anything else given almost every enemy is a dozer. Heading into the Gensec arena and going loud almost immediately, as I'll need to pull off a PC hack no matter what, let me tell you, the heart rate was up whilst waiting for first impact with the spawning dozers. Vanilla HUD Plus, my info HUD, was working overtime counting up those first 20 or so spawns, which had me on edge, standing at the top of this staircase with 2 entrances to hold. Fortunately, the Joker mod is a little bit more forgiving than anticipated when it comes to convincing dozers to fight alongside the crew, and once I obtain a bodyguard, a buffed Isma dozer in this case, my confidence started to level out. Not to mention, with decent crit luck, I was bursting these 12k dozer health pools, which meant ammo was less of a concern than I anticipated. My mistake was trapping myself inside the security hack room. In truth, there's not much reason to defend these objectives actively, as dozers never seem to prioritise them. With just a few regular fixed spawns on the map, there's not actually much threatening my progress on this heist outside of getting downed, which is most likely when stuck in a corner with 40-odd dozers slowly converging on that position. With the hack done and only one down in the tank, locating the C4 inside the mark rooms was an ideal change of pace, forcing me to move around the map and tighten the screws on the dozer's terrible pathfinding. A few accidents are bound to happen, but with the extra tanky minigun dozer now on my side, and a medic bag to reset those downs, progression to phase 2 of this heist is all but in the bag. Normally, planting the C4 using this forklift truck for elevation is as bad as heist objective design gets, but the Legion of Pursuing Dozers really put that all in perspective for me. Happy to complete one of the game's most finicky objectives, seeing as it gives me access to a forklift, which happens to be one of Dozerkind's greatest nemesis. Now onto this heist's most unique objective, the pyrotechnics for Alesso's performance, remembering to turn on Bane's subtitles to actually time the buttons properly, as this can be quite picky. The first round was simple, with most dozers still undertaking the Great Migration from the basement up to the top floor, although putting out fires up there was anything but simple, with a legion of dozers spawning out of the lifts. After being put through the minigun and school dozer shredder, I made a break for it back to the medic bag to reset my downs. With 52 dozers on the map, this obviously appears impossible, but those numbers are also to my advantage, as their processing speed is limited, meaning you're actually dealing with 30 or so slightly lobotomized dozers most of the time with such delayed reactions. Sprinting is almost always a safe bet. They can still lock in enough to be a sufficiently focused threat from time to time though, albeit at this stage I pulled off the second round of pyro. Keep in mind, if you make a single mistake here, you're set right back to the start, hence why I'm taking so much time between rounds to ensure I'm not overran right as I need to push the 2 buttons. In fact, a good portion of this run's nuance is running around the heist and throwing off the dozer's pathing, forcing them to chase a shadow as much as possible. The problem is, with so many only half-functional, they'll often hold down an objective without even meaning to, requiring me to clear out the control room one final time before successfully clearing the pyro booth section at the first time of asking. From here, it's back to climbing on forklifts and placing circular saws on the roof to open up the cache vaults. It's been so long though that even after getting my hands on the money, I forgot which of the delivery systems is most efficient for moving the bags back to the entrance where the zipline's set up. What I didn't forget was to steal back my $7 from all those Hoxton breakouts I've cleared over the years. At this stage, the war of attrition is unsurprisingly being won by the dozer army, as although my ammo reserves remain plentiful, down to my final 2 downs, with no more healing left on the map. With that in mind, I struggled to secure the first 8 of the bags before being effectively cornered up on the second floor, with the cops swarming at the escape and no longer following me around the heist like good puppy dogs. On grey screen, with only 10 of 12 bags secured, I finally entered custody for the first time 36 minutes into this heist. And you'd better believe I will be waiting out that respawn timer, staring at Sydney for the best part of 4 minutes, while she was seemingly ignored by most of the cops on the map. Again, this is what I mean about those selective lobotomies. Let me tell you though, as soon as I returned, dropped directly into the location I entered custody from, they all seemed to wake up simultaneously, requiring me to leap off the balcony, which was not a fall I knew you could survive. A useful tech for the next time I'm facing down 60 bulldozers in the Gensec arena. Anyway, a perfectly timed lull in the wave meant the dozers were sort of trying to leave the map, moving just far enough away from the loot bags to give me the space to secure 11 and 12, and leap into the container myself for the first completion of this year's Painday. That was a very necessary learning experience. 14 downs is not bad, by the way, as you're about to find out, but it will sting using up one of the better decks in the game on one of the easiest heists within this format. Still, I now have a better idea of how the AI is going to function, have acclimated to my game seizing up every now and then, probably related to all the big blokes on my screen, and I also have a secret weapon in the form of AI trading, bearing in mind dozers don't free hostages. Something I will absolutely need to leverage on Crude Awakening up next. Leech is my deck of choice for this one, and although it'll struggle to function as a sustained healing deck as intended, with so many high RPM units about, seeing as it literally enables me to become temporarily immortal and revive myself, it should give me more than enough cheese opportunities to make it through this one. The other build elements are notably similar to on the first heist. We're still going for an Armageddon style suit setup, switching over from the Clarion to the Tempest, still testing out 3-round burst fire ARs, with a signature SMG being traded out for the AK Gen 21. In practice, this plays very similarly, using my initial stealth window to locate the keycard and start the PC hack, avoiding having to drill this door open, before going loud and getting most of the prerequisites to enter the second half of the heist done before the Dozer Patrol even arrives. That excellent RNG is slightly offset by the fact that I've forgotten to give my crew AI any perks, and my interaction circle is slightly off-center. It's the little things, you know? No idea why, but I find this more off-putting than every interaction taking 4 times longer than it needs to. Up at the oil pipe puzzle, still probably the most ambitious objective we've seen in a Payday heist in about 10 years, I moved far too slowly to solve this one before the dozers started taking control of the rafters and gangways. The weakness of this setup is undoubtedly chain downs when the ampule is on cooldown, forcing me to drop my first medic bag, which is another major adaptation I've made since heist number 1 didn't require any ammo bags at all. Leech was being as slimy as usual, not feeling particularly fair, although I suppose facing down over 40 dozers at a time, you need a few things going in your favour. That said, even with an auto-revive button, once the pipe zone was overrun, there was effectively no way for me to observe the pipe order, and trying to force the issue here was my downfall. I have no idea where this Bulldozer headed off to, but after one revive, I ended up in the same abyss, with the crew AI no longer recognising my existence on the map. This corner's probably one for the sidetrack boys to have a look at, because I'm fairly certain this isn't intended to be a portal out of existence. That said, custody for the second time on this run is more of a blessing than a curse, as I can use the crew AI cam to start piecing together which pipes need turning during my 2 minutes out of action, sprinting out of that hellscape to free Bonnie from her own imprisonment, and regrouping on the far side of the heist, hoping this would despawn the dozers defending the pumps. This plan sort of worked, with 17 left on the map as I made my way back to the objective, leading to a tug of war at the bridge which acted as an exhibition of the power of this burst Tempest setup, with dozers seemingly not spawning above deck until I sprinted up the stairs to get back to the pipe puzzle. With most of the gaps already filled in, this time I was able to kickstart the transfer process, again just about keeping my head above water thanks to my second medic bag of the run. Frustratingly, this is one of the few objectives the dozers actively seek to interrupt, channeling their inner DBD killer and kicking this generator whenever they get a chance. It's far from pretty, but Leech allows me to keep forcing through the objective even at the cost of more downs, imbibing all 4 charges of my second medic bag to make it to the boss fight against Gabriel Santiago. Here I was well prepared for one of the game's tougher boss enemies, giving him the full crit spoon treatment to chunk through that 120k health pool they gave him for some reason, although forgetting he's packing electric brass knuckles himself. Still, requiring just 2 rounds of incendiary torture is pretty good going, finishing off Santiago and preparing to blow this rig sky high. Unfortunately, the spawns here are kinda crazy, and really lack the framework to support dozers being the only things spawning out of them, so after turning just a few of the valves, I was facing down Oblivion, also known as 40 dozers stood around an almost coverless set of metal barriers. Custody logically followed, at which point their AI totally short-circuited, enabling Sydney and Bonnie to go back-to-back, everyone's dream heister sandwich, to cut down half the dozers idling in the vicinity, before trading me from custody for the second time on this heist. With that, it's time to pull the lever, heal up, and sprint for the exit, although if you think I'm going to be phased by a few fixed dozer spawns at this point, you've obviously not been watching. This guy even gave me a good freeze frame on the way out. Not quite the climactic ending to the run I'd like, seeing as contractors are listed alphabetically and Blaine is right after Bane, but I'll never get over how good of an initial cinematic send-off Crude Awakening was, even if it was only temporary after being let down by Payday 3's launch. Anyway, I digress, that's heist number 2, not quite glitchless, but the framework of Payday 2 is already under enough stress without me pointing that out. 27 downs, by the way. I told you 14 was pretty good going on Alesso, and access to medic bags is only going to encourage me to value my life less and less over objective progression. Perfect for the next heist up in the classics category, possibly the most contentious of the lot, I'd say. Green Bridge is always a nightmare, and something claustrophobic like Undercover might be a problem with Dozer only turned on. But for me, across my career mode history, nothing comes close to Slaughterhouse. Virtually all the environments are a nightmare to fight through. Snipers are going to be a major problem, bearing in mind they'll still spawn with the mutator switched on, and even with crew AI, heavy bag moving is never enjoyable. Kingpin is my saviour here, although I do need to watch out for the spike damage of Reinfeld dozers tearing me down even with the Immortality Injector active. Also, the fact it makes me the centre of attention is great for waking up idle dozers who were paying us no mind previously, seemingly fixing their busted AI, much to my dismay. I'm rocking this setup with shotguns this time, the Akimbo VD-12s and Argus, because paradoxically they're great counters to snipers in this game. Otherwise, the build is very similar to what you've seen before, although I forgot to turn off the burstfire mod on the VD-12s from recording my update video, which is definitely a mistake, neutering its fire rate from its normally fully auto state. Because of that, I found myself leaning a hell of a lot more into the Argus, which actually shreds once through the faceplate, progressing through the first few minutes of the drill before needing to place down meds at the door. Again, positioning is everything with this mutator on, and fastening yourself into a choke point is always a mistake, unable to physically force my way through even with Kingpin active, and instead pushed further and further out of the building until the wave let up briefly. These lulls and assault waves are often just as deadly though, with the dozers so slow to leave the heist they end up as a greater threat, just strolling aimlessly near objectives rather than predictably hunting you down, costing me another medipack charge. Once the safe was open though, I found my rhythm, holding out and picking up what kills I could to replenish the injector before running to move a bag at a time onto the conveyor belt. I know I could just load the gold onto my crewmates and do this in 2 smooth runs to the shipping yard, but getting the bags to stick with dozers on all sides felt nearly impossible, and the odds were they'd simply drop them once I inevitably went down, setting us back to square one. That's why I went with the automatic route, as at least getting the bags down there would be progress, with dozers unable to reclaim bags in this game. I can't stress enough how important these side rooms are too for this strategy, giving me a semi-safe haven to hole up in and replenish my injector. 12 minutes in, I finally pulled the trigger and moved outside, spared the pain of a SWAT van turret spawn with more than enough bullets already sailing past my ears as it stands. Moving the first 5 bags into the crate was torture. The dozers like to bunch up inside the 2-way entrance to the warehouse, frequently body blocking the exit and gatekeeping me away from my own medic bag. Dozer type spawns were also not in my favour, seemingly facing down mostly skull and minigun variants who have a much higher damage over range threshold, complementing these snipers who already made stepping out into the open a living hell. I secured 6 of 8 bags before Sydney went into custody, failing to realise Quick had gone with her, meaning the full interaction time on my medic bag was longer than my injector could sustain, dropping me into custody alongside her. Fortunately, Slaughterhouse is another heist where the dozers seem to go on strike once I'm off the map, giving Bonnie and Bodhi free reign to wait out the trade, as I'd noticed I'd forgotten to give them their trademark acrons, which is probably why they weren't helping as much as I'd gotten used to. I can hardly complain though, because these guys are the only reason this run's not dead in the water already, bringing me back only to immediately go down again after failing to proc overkill to buff my shotguns. Trading for Sydney was essential, but once more I'd wasted too long and this little shack was way above its max occupancy, physically stuck in a corner and buffeted around before another almost instant trip to the slammer. We know what that means though, with the 2 minutes of staring at Bonnie's buzz cut. Get your mind out the gutter. Once again, I rose from my prison, only to be sideways by the time my eyes had cleared from the flashbang that spawned alongside me. This challenge is really embodying that Painday experience. Seeing the light of day for the first time in about 5 minutes, I was able to recover 1 of the 2 bags we needed, before again being stopped short of the final scraps of gold Bane demands of us. This time, leveraging the AI's immense tankiness, I just loaded the bag on Bodhi's back and got him to do the heavy lifting, dragging it over the fence and enabling us to finally move the gold 31 minutes into this heist. Now to find a quiet corner to wait in, except try as I might, these spawns are relentless. Usually safe spots are covered on all sides, and even as I jam myself into this corner, there's nowhere to really hide, hitting grey screen once more and again being repelled from interacting with the medic bag I'd not properly thought out when placing. That's custody number 3 for those keeping count, although this one was short-lived with the assault wave ending before I'd even noticed, going down about 10 seconds into regaining control. I found a slightly safer corner to hole up in this time around, although if it wasn't obvious already, staying mobile is a virtual necessity when my firepower doesn't match the health bars of what's being thrown my way, eventually overwhelming my shotgun's DPS and leaving the crew to hold out one final time with escape now available. Again, if the Dozer's just locked in, I'm pretty sure this legion of 10 moonwalking minigun wielders could end Bodhi's life whenever they wanted to, but they're too busy salivating at the thought of me coming back from custody for the first time ever, actually spawning in on the head of a unit already in place, crowd surfing my way over the Dozers who dropped me not once, but twice within seconds of my return. Snipers covered the exit, leaving me on grey screen once more, but the ambush at the escape feels like child's play compared to what I was facing on the other side, mostly skirting around the fixed spawns before sticking the needle in one final time to complete this most miserable of heists. I can't believe they have the cheek to take 50% of my XP off me after that, a potentially record-breaking 44 downs across a 40-minute heist, more than a down per minute, and that's without factoring in the 4 stints in police custody I had on the way there. To be honest, whilst I'm not sure there's too many novel ways of getting around this one, it's just such a nightmare for this rule set, it was enough embarrassment to force my hand into creating a new rule. From now on, I will not be allowing more than 3 trips to custody on a single heist, as I'm basically just able to face tank my way through with enough patience to wait out jail time as it stands, seeing as the Dozers never free hostages and also don't seem arsed enough to kill my crewmates most of the time. Whilst this will make the run harder in theory, maybe it can salvage just a little bit of pride I lost after barely managing a 3 KD in a bloody horde shooter. Anyway, the lesser known Gemma McShay's heists are up next, with her offering 2 Texas Heat DLC options, which just about qualifies her for this run. Midland Ranch and Lost in Transit are probably about equal in terms of difficulty in my eyes, but I'm going with the latter simply because I think its more open layout will make the Dozers more of a threat. And on attempt 1, I think I found proof of that, tearing through my Sicario build within seconds of abseiling into the first warehouse. That smoke cooldown timer is far too lengthy to sustain me here, and with so many units dealing consistent rather than spike damage, the unique Sicario dodge mechanics aren't much use here. In fact, for the first time in this run, I decided after entering custody 5 minutes in, I'm just going to hit the eject button and try again, rather than accepting the meat grinder approach. My primary adaptation on attempt 2 was A, forgetting to buy any assets, which is far from ideal, but also B, setting up a secondary ECM jammer by the primary objective set on this one, near where the train spawns. As I'm running a very lean pistol build here, in fact so lean it's missing half its key skills, hence why I never have any ammo, I'm at least free to run this feedback jammer to provide us with a secondary form of survivability. With Jack of all trades equipped, this is a tech I'm definitely going to leverage more moving forwards, as a 20-second stun timer every 4 minutes is massive for forcing through objectives, which is really what Sicario is all about with its smoke mechanics in the first place. The smoke is so much easier to shoot through now as well, making the playstyle feel slightly more rewarding, at least when your only targets aren't 800-pound gorillas wielding LMGs. Still, with the correct train type spotted, actually cutting away inside isn't so bad, helped by the fact Dozers don't know how to operate doors, and so will instead funnel in through the roof one by one, meaning we can get our hands on the printing plates easily enough. Securing them is another thing altogether, dealing with any sniper overwatch as best I can before moving the bags as close as possible to the train. From here, the crazily enhanced dodge effect of the smoke generally gives me the space to secure at least a few per throw, with the ECM also providing additional stuns every few minutes to cover me whilst I secure the final 3. I was correct that the open layout turned most Dozers into effective snipers, but heists like this one without key choke points also enable me to spread my foes thin and make death at least slightly less certain. With the escape train filled, getting it moving was comparatively simple once I'd remembered how to get on top of it again, setting up the hooks to lift the train over to the escape tracks. That's all with a full set of downs and medic bag in hand. With the point of no return active, there's just one final hurdle this heist can painfully throw at you at the 11th hour though, with a set of repairs required to keep the lift going and avoid being timed out over 20 minutes into the heist. My dodge luck was impeccable when fixing both, with the crew AI bonus really saving the day here, although as soon as the job was done, I fell without an ally nearby to secure the revive. Even more frightening, for once, the Dozers seemed to care about my crewmates, dropping Bodhi and turning Sydney into Swiss cheese. If anyone asks why she's not coming to Payday 3, just send them this clip to point out she's probably a goner. More lead than human though, the guys actually brushed this one off somehow. In case you're wondering why I wasn't entirely in favour of giving the crew AI potential buffs in the April update, here's your video evidence. What they lack in object permanence and functional aim, they make up for by being made of goddamn obsidian, tanking the 40-strong Dozer army to bring me back with a minute to spare and the train ready to depart. Alone and without my perk deck throwable, there was still the potential to choke here, but fortunately the guys again saved the day by dragging me out from under the tracks and fleeing this one with just over 10 seconds left on the clock. 8 downs, by the way, a track record if you can believe it, as we head onto Firestarter, probably the simplest heist of this run. None of Hector's jobs are that difficult. I went with Firestarter as it forces you to move around more than others, and all 3 days offer genuine threat. But honestly, this one is up for debate in the comment section. As I know, it's an opportunity to switch over to a weaker deck. I'm running Ex-President on this heist, a perk which has Death Sentence viability with its gating and healing capabilities, but is certainly not at its best when every cop on the map is a Bulldozer. Healing is nice, but it's never sufficient up against this kind of firepower, hence why I'm moving to some of the more degenerate strategies at my disposal, such as Swansong. Blind objective forcing with Swansong used to be all the rage when One Down first came out, so I'm looking to revive the spirit of that old meta and increase my odds of actually picking up kills with what is a very ordinary AR setup, rocking the Valkyria rifle alongside the saw in my secondary slot, as that's going to speed up all 3 days of this one. Just keep in mind it'll now be banned for all future heists once this is over. On day 1 at the airport, things started slowly. I mean, it's not exactly a great sign, the regular gangsters are cutting through this build before the dozers even show up. And that didn't change for the better once I started moving the bags of weapons around the back alleys of the warehouses. That was until I realised just how much damage I could actually output during the full Swansong window, not only giving me precious objective time, but also a burst of ammoless DPS to clear somewhat of a path through these endless spawns. And something I'm actually quite shocked I got through the first 3 heists without. Kind truck spawns and easy access to the fuel tanker meant I wasn't carrying the weapons far before chucking them in a blazing hot inferno, using the saw to open up bonus trucks and make the bag moving process a little more seamless. Objective wise, compared to what I'd already gone through, this was incredibly painless, not really in the spirit of the whole thing I suppose, with day 1 more of a formality than anything else, so let's hope I'm not wasting the utility of the saw on a comparatively easy heist. What I will say is, chaining downs into each other feels much better when you get to avenge yourself before death, so Swansong is here to stay. Also, note the regular cop ambush at the escape. Standard cop spawns have been a thing across most heists so far, but they're generally limited to the first responders and guys stationed on the heist from the get-go. These fixed spawns are something to keep an eye on because although they're a relative non-issue in terms of tangible damage threat, there are things standard cops can do that dozers cannot, which I'm just going to subtly foreshadow here as we move on to day 2 at the FBI headquarters. Again, the saw saves us from having to drill the second door open, meaning we're on a little more than a 3-minute timer before we can get our hands on the servers and make a break for it. Even better, the spawns on these early heists always value tension beyond the rush of the horde. Compare anything released in the first couple of years of the game's lifespan to its latter few, and you'll notice a massive difference in the speed and ramp up of cop arrival times, meaning there was only a minute left on the drill by the time they started rolling in. Admittedly, they make up for lost time by crashing in through the skylights, but for the first time ever on this run, I was in position to move to clear it without a single down. That all obviously changed on the escape, running headlong into the second wave of spawns who had essentially gathered on the roadside to block my path to the van. The double-edged sword of minigun dozers being so slow is that they often unintentionally got objectives they weren't even intending to. Within seconds, the previously invincible Bodhi was also down, showing the crew AI can bleed. It just requires a really concerted effort from the dozers to get the job done. Shortly after getting him back on his feet, I was sent to grey screen, but with 8 whole charges of medic bags still at my disposal, this was never in any doubt. Flanking back through for the second server, Bonnie had dutifully dragged halfway across the map, securing a 7-minute completion with just 6 downs. Embarrassingly, my record up to this point. That record wouldn't stand for long though, as day 3 is even more straightforward, with Bodhi asserting his dominance by standing on the photocopier apparently. You see, like day 2, the wave doesn't hit until the thermal drill is halfway through, at which point the dozers don't really have the time to swarm the bank in enough numbers to stop me forcing a way through, opening up the second door with the saw and immediately making room for the cash to burn by baiting dozers away from the objective, sprinting the escape without entering another gunfight, and clearing this day with just 3 downs. Moving on to the toughest of Galfeng's 2 heists, Ukrainian prisoner, I again used my short stealth window to avoid having to drill the server room open, meaning I was already set up to steal the gas canister from the truck by the time dozers started rolling in. Again, Swansong is my saviour here, taking on the first wave headlong thanks to the genuinely impressive DPS of the 3-round burst M308. This feels incredibly good up against dozers, even landing one burst kills with the right crit rolls. Grinder was my perk deck of choice for this one, a reasonable option with its active heal effect, but Sustain is never going to trade favourably into the DPS of Deathwish dozers. Even so, getting ahead of the objective curve meant I was almost always on the run on this one, meaning just as I was starting to be overwhelmed inside the offices, it was time to move on to the warehouse to resuscitate Vlad. The direct roof spawns here are a little less abusable, actually getting myself trapped inside Vlad's previous prison and needing to drop my first medic bag a little earlier than I'd ideally like. Still, the point of no return was dodged, with Vlad avoiding an untimely cardiac arrest, meaning we can reset the spawns for the skid loader slalom. Again, this section is heavily populated by fixed spawns rather than dozers, meaning it wasn't long before we were on the move once more, reaching the office checkpoint with fewer bruises than I'd anticipated. The PC hack forces you to hold out here, which is always going to lead to some unfavourable downs, and the placement of my final medic bag, although again, my burst fire DPS is more than enough to push back outside with the assistance of Swansong invulnerability. The final skid loader section is comparatively simple, although without finding the fireworks in the first few containers I checked, I was completely forced away from the dockyard by the converging spawns of both my pursuers and the newly arrived dock defenders. With my remaining downs slipping away and my only lifeline a pre-planning medic bag next to the final objective, I didn't have much choice but to charge directly into the danger, locating the fireworks in the process and just about getting them firing to call in the escape right after using up the final medic bag charge in the vicinity. My only option now was to sprint back to the offices, narrowly avoiding custody in the process, before again charging into certain death in the full knowledge my boys had my back, shrugging off the hail of hellfire to resuscitate me for one final sprint to the exit, clocking in a very necessary 24 deaths over the course of this heist. I'm starting to realise the real skill on this challenge run is timing those deaths correctly to land the most heist impact with the lowest resource cost, only unloading during Swansong to conserve ammo, and truly to make downs count towards objective completion, area clear or pivotal repositioning. In less self-indulgent terms, banging your head against the right kind of walls. And the next wall blocking my path is the dreaded Henry's Rock from Locke. I considered the White House just as heavily, but given we could utilise stealth to cheese a portion of that difficulty, I decided to instead head into the meat grinder from minute 1, which is Henry's Rock. This is the perfect example of that change in cop spawn philosophy in late game Payday 2, with more than 20 dozers on top of my head within the first 30 seconds of this mission. Fortunately, they don't seem too bothered about interrupting the hat boxes, allowing me to get out of this first lockdown room without using up a precious medic bag placement. The crit microgun is pretty damn solid as far as non-explosive dozer killers go, but as with most consistent damage over time options, when compared to spike dealers like the M308, pushing back against the dozers often requires an initial blood sacrifice and the power of Swansong invulnerability to truly pull off, meaning once more I'm on a 10 medic bag charge timer. Which means my inability to locate the final pictograph in the archaeology wing of the lab was getting more and more costly by the minute, forcing me back into the vault itself and cajoled into placing that first medic bag at the attempt. For the first time across this run, our only option was to hold out the assault wave, as I needed clear access to this room to explore for the final picture. But the problem is, they flee the heist so slowly it's impossible to clear without shedding blood, which the microgun is more than decent at doing. Still unable to find the last buck I needed to locate after the end of the assault though, Plan B was my only way forward, using the powerful, if inconsistent value of Rogue's random chance to dodge to flee back to the entrance of the heist and bait the Dozer Legion out to meet me. This spread them out somewhat, although the minigun wielding guys were so slow they still blocked my path upon returning, but not before I'd located the final piece of the puzzle to gain access to coffin number 1. Another miracle sprint to the entrance allowed the crew AI to do the heavy lifting, dragging the bag to the conveyor belt whilst I hid and wait, a strategy I'd picked up from Slaughterhouse. In a massive turn of fortune, all my numbers came in at once as the computer lab held the key to the second box, one of the least involved objectives this heist can throw your way as a simple hack, and crucially, one that sees us relocate from the side room to open control room, which keeps the doses on the move. They also don't appear to have the capacity to stop these hacks, meaning it really is just a case of pushing into the oncoming horde, using up my final medic bag placement to ensure safe passage back to collect the crate, with Rogue again doing me a solid and enabling me to reset my downs for the final push against the automated turrets back outside. In my infinite wisdom, I decided for once I had the leeway to face these things directly rather than complete the hack, assuming this would be faster and help me avoid having to face down both dozers and SWAT turrets simultaneously. I had the damage for sure, but had completely forgotten that once they take you down, they turn away from you, making it impossible to land a blow on their critical point when in Swansong or downed, as was my initial plan. Whilst I took down one the old-fashioned way, I didn't have the same luck against the second, instead fleeing whilst the hack shut it off with Rogue failing to scam me out of another down, and instead plunged me into custody for the first time on this heist, almost at the very same moment the assault ended, cheesing me 4 downs at very little cost. Once back on the ground, with Bile called in, my second sprint was rewarded with decent dodge chance, holding out next to the final medic bag to bait the dozers away from the escape chopper. This sort of worked, although I still very much required the full suite of downs at my disposal to face-temp my way through the artifact securing section, again carried over the finish line by my stalwart crew AI, who haven't been down since Firestarter, and the face against the grindstone gameplay that is Swansong. It's crazy to think this is the nerfed version of the skill. Oh, and all that in just 43 downs? Easy work. Moving on now to a heist I haven't attempted in years, not since the Demo Man run if I remember correctly. The Butcher unfortunately offers the Bomb Forest heist, a pretty cool setup with an excellent heist fantasy objective line, which was totally, pardon the pun, butchered by its baffling heist layout, wide open sightlines, paired with snipers, no more than a pixel tall from some locations, and genuinely nauseating hill physics, which can lead to lethal fall damage for daring to hit the sprint button. All a recipe for one of the most infamously unpleasant experiences in the game, and that's without every cop being replaced with a bulldozer. It's time to pull out the big guns for this one, equipping Stoic, the most tank-orientated perk deck in the game, in addition to the recently buffed RPG, which can one-shot every unit type on Deathwish, including the mighty minigun dozer, with its very limited ammo capacity. That in mind, I've pivoted over to an ammo bag setup, as for once I have the firepower to actually push back against dozer kind, rather than just outlasting them with medic bag down resets. Attempt 1 at this actually went swimmingly. Damage drop-off makes even the deadliest dozers manageable on such a massive heist, and they're surprisingly easy to kite around the trains. Once in the rhythm of holding onto a single rocket to get the most out of Swansong, surprisingly easy to clear out 6 or 7 dozers at a time. My primary, the explosive heavy crossbow, was more of an experiment than anything else, seeing how it fares with the buffs to explosive damage, but for the most part it's just a setup weapon to secure dozer jokers or pick off snipers from across the map. In pre-planning, I'd repeated a historic mistake though, getting the buffed water asset which speeds up the water drilling section of the heist, but forgetting just how much of a slog it is to eventually secure the 4 bomb parts, relying on the fact that I had at least 3 mules to assist me when carrying. This made the early portion of the heist much easier, until I remembered I need to locate C4 on one of the other train carts, wasting minutes of drilling time. I really should have got started from the get-go on this one. The main problem with rarely playing a heist challenge running. At least I remembered you can scale most of the upturned cars simply by jumping into the angle they're tilted away from, not needing to micromanage the bloody ladder, as if there wasn't enough already going on this heist. Within 12 minutes, I got my hands on the explosives, and with the vault carriage being high up on the top of the hill, there wasn't much stopping me blasting my way inside immediately, although that also meant we had much further to reach the escape, some 250 meters away. The key at this point is not going down, as the crew AI will drop a bag to go for the rescue, which is unlikely to be in a convenient location. My mistake was overthinking that though, and dropping the second medic bag early, saving the down, but leaving my only way to reset further downs way off in the distance, forgetting that even once at the ridge we spawn on, there's still 100 odd meters left to traverse, with plenty additional dozer spawns blocking that singular path, and most crucially, no more rockets left in my RPG. The outcome was inevitable, going down on the final straight with Bodhi inches away from securing the revive, and instead entering custody for the first time. No problem, right? I'm sure the crew can hold out, they've done so dozens of times before facing worse odds, but alas, this time was different. This time, the dozers weren't lobotomized, dropping all 3 one by one and dooming this attempt to the dreaded restart button. Still, important lessons have been learned. Firstly, I should go all in on the chopper escape. It might make the first half of the heist more difficult, but A, that's a better place to fail for your mental health, and B, it's a simple section on aggregate, especially when most of this challenge comes to the fore when the dozers are given the opportunity to congregate. Remembering to open the other carts proactively also helps keep things moving along, as the chopper drops the hose this time. Getting down to the crowbars was a bit of a pain, as is fitting into this bloody train cart, as the ladder physics really throws you off when trying to jump in, but the C4 didn't hide from me for long. After blasting my way inside and setting the crew up with bags, this might be one of the longest range sniper kills I've picked up, meaning no one was covering bile once he finally rolled into probably the most densely populated portion of the map, but with the final ammo bag usage giving me 20 seconds of guaranteed endless ammo through Bulletstorm, it was easy enough to fire down on the entire congregation, forcing my way through yet another completion. Honestly, compared to within regular runs, where I instead always go for the bomb dockyard, this one wasn't that bad, clocking in at just 3 downs for probably the most successful heist of the run. The Dentist is up next, a bit of a tricky one to place in terms of difficulty, with the likes of Hoxton Breakout and Hotline Miami undoubtedly offering their own stiff multi-day challenges. I've decided to go with Golden Grin instead because its difficulty is more consistent, allowing me to test out the build I'm most excited for, at least when concepting this run. A genuine Dozer Deleter setup, using the armor-gating properties of Anarchist to run a lightweight setup, actually enabling my Thanatos sniper rifle to crit with just over 1 in 4 odds, actually one-shotting whenever I hit that dice roll in my favour. For Dozer kind, this is undoubtedly my most lethal build, although armor-gating is much harder when facing down a hail of minigun and LMG rounds, meaning I'm still just as reliant on Swansong to push these early objectives when setting up the winch. Like Bomb Forest, but with more cover, surprisingly easy to keep dozers at arm's length, taking control of the second floor and shooting down on the threats below, at least until the BFD comes into play. For the first time on this one, we have a problem, as the dozers can and will look to shut down the drill whenever possible, meaning instead of this just being about survival, I need to actively protect this thing and take serious risks turning it back on. That's without even getting into the shuttle runs to fill up its water coolers, which more than test the 2 seconds of Anarchist and vulnerability. That being said, my medic supplies were also plentiful, meaning I was never really in much danger of failing this one despite the struggle. Once the laser cutter had completed its 360, just under 25 minutes in, the back of this one had been broken, jumping down to rescue the Dentist's loot, although Bonnie got herself stuck topside, making this a 3-man job for the remainder of the trudge back to the limo. Again, the size of this heist plays into my favour, as the dozers never have the chance to form that effective blockade, which had stopped me out on the Bomb Forest heist, healing up once more on the way out to complete this one sub 30, with still an impressive array of 22 downs, still below average if you can believe it. Now we're on to a grudge match though. The biker heist from the Elephant is one of my least favourite in the game, which is why I'm elevating it to his most challenging, even though framing frame day 3 might have been just as much of a nightmare. For this one, I'm switching over to Sociopath, the initial idea being that a massive melee multiplier might allow me to one-shot some dozers, but the reality was disappointing, with Bloodthirst virtually a necessity to achieve that damage, meaning chaining kills together was mostly out of the question. Still, it's a reasonable armor-gating deck, which pairs well with the innate DPS and the minigun, and more importantly, the Commando 101, surviving most self-damage from debatably the best weapon in the game, which is doubly true when up against an army of dozers. With double ammo bags, this was a virtually endless bring of destruction, two-shotting most dozers across a massively forgiving radius. Again, with the dozers not bothering to interrupt the mechanic, the main objective here is to survive between errands, and try to avoid being stuck in a corner with half of dozer kind. When my rockets weren't being shot out the sky by stray minigun rounds, it was easy enough to push dozers back, with them often grouping up to take the AoE damage of the commando. Rolling into 2 clubhouse objectives was also a blessing, saving me that sprint across to where the SWAT van turret lies in wait. Securing the chrome skull for Ross Vanity before moving on to the final objective out in the bunker, I managed to drill my way inside on a grey screen thanks to some clutch Sociopath melee damage for once, justifying the perk deck's inclusion on this build, refueling once inside and making a miracle push back topside to somehow avoid a stint in custody. Just as surprisingly, this tiny shack turns out to be the ideal hiding spot for the final mechanic defending section, firing Bulletstorm rockets around the corner to avoid head-on damage like I was playing TF2, and keeping the eventual escape zone relatively clear, with my totem pole of crewmates taking most of the heat off me. I say relatively clear because once the bike became rideable, it wasn't exactly a great cinematic escape, stuttering along and relying on the fact Swansong doesn't kick you off the vehicle you're already riding to make it around this corner and onto the open road, shockingly completing the biker heist day 1 on the first attempt, in roughly the same time I'd expect from a standard run of this one, with a body count over 200. Day 2 is the real reason I front-loaded the power level of this build though, as damage is going to be a necessity to progress through the train section where the dozer spawns can literally body block your path forwards. The initial run to the biker boss cost my first set of downs, requiring my one and only doctor's bag to come back from, although the melee damage of Sociopath was a godsend here as it circumvents the biker boss's massive explosive damage reduction stat. The way back to the escape was unsurprisingly even bloodier, as the dozers filtering in behind me had been given the chance to properly spawn in and act as physical roadblocks. Even under Swansong, there wasn't enough time to clear a true path, finally going to custody about 3 carriages from freedom, with Bodhi joining soon after. However, although Sydney was quite literally engulfed by the dozer wave, her and Bonnie somehow survived this one, as they seemingly lost all desire to fight after downing her. I have no idea why the cop AI is breaking like this, but I can hardly blame the devs for not foreseeing this eventuality when I couldn't be playing the game in a less intended fashion. Anyway, all 46 dozers were grouped up within this one carriage by the time my 2-minute jail time was up, meaning this might be the record for the most dozer kills in 5 seconds, satisfyingly deleting 26 off the map in just one reload if my HUD's to be believed. This was more than enough crowd control to open up a path to yet another, rather cheesy victory, taking us onto the final heist in this entire run, and of course it has to be Vlad's. That's right, this is Goat Simulator, dozers only, undoubtedly the most painful heist in this entire run. In all honesty, this could be a video in its own right, which calls for the most disgusting perk deck I've been holding back until now, Hacker, giving me a tool with which I can lock down even dozers for 10 seconds at a time, opening up a window to just maybe complete these godforsaken goat-based objectives. Attempt 1 went about as well as you'd imagine, going down to the beat cops in less than a minute. Never mind the first wave of spawning dozers, who put me into custody within 3.5 minutes. This was such a bad start, it simply prompted an immediate reset. Attempt 2 though went a hell of a lot better, avoiding aggroing the cops for as long as possible to get started on some of the more esoteric goat locations before the fully auto dozers started cross-mapping me. My weapon of choice is the burst variant of the AMR, a pretty mid-tier weapon, but after seeing how the M308 had performed, I was looking for a similar impact and sort of got it here with decent spike damage, especially when clearing a path with Swansong. The micro Uzi fit my concealment requirements, but is also a decent enough bullet hose when called upon. That being said, I might have peaked early on the routing here, as I'm certainly not at my most powerful when taking on the hardest host in the game, relying heavily on the undisputed best interruption effect of the Pocket ECM. Even its ludicrous range isn't always enough though on one of the most sprawling maps in the game, as Day 1 saw dozers and the eventual dreaded snipers continuously put pressure on my limited resources from way outside my immediate vicinity. Admittedly, where the Pocket ECM struggled, my other secret weapon thrived. That is in the form of the Longfellow. Even whilst in Swansong, this muscle car might be the best anti-dozer option I've got at my disposal, ramming through any blockades to keep up the pace, with dodge also pairing nicely with the innate damage avoidance when inside vehicles. That in mind, disaster really struck about 10 minutes in when I got my best asset stuck in the level's geometry, having to flee the scene before entering custody for the first time right as the assault wave ended, cheesing out a free set of 4 downs incidentally. That didn't solve my stuck car issue though, so I instead turned to what's unsurprisingly the easiest section of the heist, securing the goats in and around the apartment building, managing to at least locate all 15 and leave them on the roadside to secure later, taking advantage of Dozer's inability to pick up bags, or goats in this case. After a lengthy struggle, eventually dropping my actual ECM jammer to assist, I got the car free, at last ploughing my way into securing 11 out of the 15 goats required. The stakes were still high though, going to custody a second time just inches away from interacting with my would-be saviour medic bag, but despite 2 minutes of serious pressure on my crew AI, they outlasted the full assault, bringing me back to avenge myself upon the snipers who'd claimed almost as many downs as in dozers on this one, with enough space to recover the Longfellow, making one final sprint to secure goat number 15, and be dragged to a very unlikely sub-30 finish. But although Day 1 is what earned Goat Sim its reputation, I quietly believe the second day is actually harder. It's just Day 1 acts as a filter for it. That being said, in dozers only, I'm about to be the one getting truly filtered, as even the initial Honduran gangster assault was enough to drop this highly specialised build. Several minutes into this one, the realisation dawned on me, this is the first real heist we've run into that has sustained heavy SWAT unit spawns. These guys don't seem to clog the spawn pool, meaning there's no advantage to them being here, and most problematically, they've got a real goat fetish, forcibly carrying our mules back across the main courtyard and away from most of the cage part spawns required to complete the first section of this heist. It took over 7 brutal minutes before I'd even managed to get one goat inside, let alone 15, and the remaining 14 were being moved further and further away by the minute. I eventually decided to just rip the cord and see what I could do with better RNG, but at that moment I was sent into custody. With over 50 dozers on the playing field, it wasn't long before the rest of my crew were in a similar position, and I made the call to restart. Just what I need though, a heist that's not only a nightmare in terms of its core objectives and combat scenarios, but also one with some truly devious RNG to fend off, although Run 2 was immediately blessed with the good kind. The first cage spawn was next to the loot pool location the SWATs aimed to move the goats towards, meaning the bulk of the bag moving process was effectively being handled by the enemy. Even better, this being the first location meant that the core dozer force had already spawned in by the barn and would need to make the trek over here to pose an active threat, holding them at bay even longer thanks to my ECM setup. That in mind, I was able to secure 8 of the goats in the first loot cage Harudin picked up, breaking the back of the toughest section. Surely, right? This is the toughest section. Anyway, I next rolled into the cage spot in the farmyard, which is the second best RNG, and probably best I could hope for right now, as it forced the pre-spawn dozers to go on yet another pilgrimage across the map if they wanted to stop me, managing to secure a further 4, bringing us tantalizingly close to the escape. Within one final bag rotation, with just 3 left to pick up, this final holdout was always going to be comfortable, although I was forced to drop down my final med supplies, leaving me virtually naked for the final push to the escape. And it turns out, this might be the most ludicrous stretch of gameplay I've ever faced down. These spawns are egregious, getting bum rushed by over 40 dozers within seconds of arriving at the bridge, falling into custody with a minute and a half still left on the drill at the door. The crew survived, but ran on foot all the way back to the barnyard, meaning my spawn position was completely unsupervised. While Sydney found her way back, the other 2 never did, and the 2 of us lacked the firepower to hold out alone. What I failed to notice was I was completely out of hostages, meaning when I inevitably found my way back behind bars, there was no way out this time, ending this 33-minute heist with heartbreak. It gets worse too, as I dragged myself back for another attempt minutes later, which saw me speedrun a stint in custody, meaning the wave got ahead of the objective progress, leading to another 30-minute stalemate as it felt like I was doing bloody farmer miserable, dozer only, on account of the fact that I could barely get a single goat inside each cage. Eventually, I rolled into the preferred spawn, but at this point, nowhere was safe, and despite the short walk to the secure point, I went through 2 more stints in prison and the remainder of my placeable resources. Almost 40 minutes into this one, with 5 goats still roaming free, I was finally put out of my misery for good by a sniper in the hills, not even getting another run at that nightmarish escape section. However, whilst it would be a slight exaggeration to say it all came together on attempt 4 of this monstrous day, bearing in mind the first goat cage spawn was miserable and cost me both asset medic bag charges to force through, it was a marked improvement, at least once I finally managed to make the cage spawn anywhere but next to that dried up river. Almost 15 minutes in and just 1 goat secured, you'd be forgiven for assuming this should be an immediate restart, but the pieces finally fell into place to shove all 14 of the bleating bastards into the final cage, which spawned next to the spot where the SWATs take them. It might have cost me 7 medic bag charges, the equivalent of 28 downs, but let's be honest, who's counting? And somehow, this was my fastest time yet, able to jump back in the car after just 18 minutes. I didn't get particularly far, falling into Swansong almost immediately, and only just getting the rescue from Sydney in time, but that was still enough to make it all the way over to the bridge once more. Yet again, for want of a better phrase, this is a shit show. Snipers are just the tip of the iceberg, with these cascading spawns making it almost impossible to keep the 2-minute drill alive, although this time around I'd saved my equipment ECM jammer to at least give us 20 seconds worth of peace. This chained into my PCMs as I started stockpiling the dozer bodies for potential jokers in the future, or more likely, kindling for my crew to pull me back from custody without having to sprint across the map. This, paired with those many distractions, was enough to open up the door, but that's only half the puzzle when it comes to spinning this bridge around. With almost every dozer seemingly deciding to congregate on the stairs, I physically couldn't get up to start the next phase initially, losing key seconds. Eventually, a path opened up, but with regular SWATs still spawning in, the objective wasn't a foregone conclusion, as they can switch the button off, leading to my 4th and final down, with Swansong just about allowing me to start the timer from custody. In yet another miracle of diesel engine madness, the dozers went effectively limp upon me leaving the map, guaranteeing I'd be back for one final push of the button, an act I dutifully undertook 2 minutes later, whilst also managing to activate my now reset ECM jammer before the cops remembered what they were doing here. Even so, with the objective clear, escape wasn't guaranteed, needing to still drive off into the sunset whilst already back on grey screen. With my ECMs wasted, it was in Bane's hands now as I rammed through 6 of the man mountains standing in my way, before again being plunged into custody. But with my crew once more unbothered by the jokers, this was it. Getting dragged back in the saddle to push around the final corner with Swan Song, and finally, after hours of one of the least pleasurable Payday experiences I can recollect, making it out of here at long last. 38 more downs to the pain total, although the AMR had handled this one better than anticipated, with Slaughterhouse still taking the official crown of most embarrassing heist on this run. And that, ladies and gents, is Painday. 11 of the game's toughest heists within the framework of a genuinely batshit rule set. The funniest thing is, the mutator actually gives you halved payout rewards for your trouble, when it should probably be doubled if we're being honest. At least for the number of heists attempted, this has to be my most torturous down-filled run, saved only by the dozers seemingly losing all interest in my crew AI sporadically, letting them get their kicks in for free and guaranteeing a revive, as dozers were ever free your zip-tied hostages in waiting. Total cheese that in truth only prolonged the suffering, but what do you expect from a run as poorly conceived as this one? Probably the least skill-heavy concept I've ever come up with, but also the run requiring the most patience. That being said, once the ego dies and you accept that death comes to us all, but it's going to come to you specifically roughly 40 times per heist, taking your lumps all feels that bit more manageable, like entering a zen state of coming to terms with your own Payday inadequacies. Humbling in all the best ways, you can call this the start of reparations for the Payday Bloomy debacle. A low-skill, high-patience run, but also a showcase of the game's weirdest and most wonderful mechanics. Oh, and don't play like this in public lobbies. Yes, you can basically force your way through objectives no matter what with the right skill and perk combination, but bringing your mindless crew AI along for the ride is a hell of a lot less egregious than forcing others online to babysit you. Anyway, I'm relieved to be free of this one. A crazy script for an 11 heist long run, but hopefully you enjoyed. If you have the same apparently masochistic mindset as myself and want to give this challenge a go on at least one of the heists on this run, keep in mind the number of downs to beat is either 303 across all successful heists, or an average of 27.5 downs per heist, which I suspect is fairly beatable. Thank you so much for watching. I really don't think I can put myself through anything like this for quite some time, so soak it all in, and I'll see you all very soon in the next video. Oh, and Apex Gaming PCs are still around. I'm still selling the hosting themed PCs. If that's on your radar, check them out from the link below. That's really it this time. Take care. Bye bye. A huge thank you to my dedicated Patreon backers. If you want to join this crew in going infamous, check out the link below and pledge as little as $2 to see your name in the credits, or get 24-hour early access to future videos and vote on upcoming content. Take care. I'll see you all soon.